Hello, beautiful, and welcome to the podcast where we're moving the conversation forward about the choices you make in your daily life. I'm your host, Monica Cox, and I'm here right alongside of you, learning, growing, observing, and trying to make better choices consciously and subconsciously. Together, we're going to become better versions of ourselves and have raw, honest, open conversations about the things that truly affect our lives. And maybe, just maybe, finally get to a place where everyone else's BS doesn't trigger us. So this conversation started when I posted a photo. I got to see him in Hawaii, which no one comes to Hawaii because it's not a swing state and it's always left, right? So no one really comes. I'm not sure why he came, but he did, and I went to go see him. I posted a photo, and then we started talking behind the scenes of, well, do you talk politics? Do you express your views
Mhm.
to your community, whether that be in your business or even family and friends, right? And I think for both of us, we both knew who Kennedy was because of our activism in health and wellness and really having a better conversation about these things instead of making them so black and white, like anti-vax or get all your vax, all those things. Like it's not those kind of conversations, um, they're not healthy and they need to be more healthy because there's room for both. But we need all the facts and the evidence. And when you're pushing one side so much so, like it has been in America for a really long time, um, those healthy debates go out. And then all of a sudden, 10, 20, 30 years later, when there's that small minority, I don't know why, but like the hippies in the 60s just keep coming back to me. Like no one listened to them. And like, yes, our community is growing, but when we're just trying to have better conversations and maybe get this information out there, we get backlash from very popular OBGYNs who have utilized social media for their business and their message. Companies who are in connection with maybe these harsher chemicals and drugs. And no one can deny the what's the word? The banning of the oh, what is it called? Just brain fart. Um, when like social media doesn't the censorship, right? The censorship, or like we all saw during COVID, even if someone was just randomly talking about their day and mentioned COVID as something, it would get like this flag, like this is the facts about COVID, and would send you directly to what they wanted you to read. And so you were like, well, how do you feel about expressing your views on social media? And we are really coming out of a time where, especially when it was the Trump and Clinton era, right? So we're kind of a few years away from that now. It started to get angry and mean, right? Like our
Very
parents'
divisive.
generation
Mhm,
could have conversations, right? And
mhm.
be friends and be married to the opposite side, or opposing candidates. And over the last, let's say, 10 years, like that just hasn't been the case. It's been so angry and hateful. And I think that's personally by design. but um, but yeah, like how do you show up, especially with, let's just say, a conspiracy theory candidate, a guy who has really, I mean, he's done the work. He has the evidence. I don't know if you know why he even got into vaccines in the first place, because like you say, he was an environmental lawyer. Do you know the story?
Um, I don't know exactly the timeline, but and this is just my understanding. I am not an RXK or RFK expert, and I am not. I don't follow politics closely. I just go from what I know about him and how I feel about him. but it's my understanding that he has stated that all his children had been vaccinated. And it wasn't until mothers of vaccine injured children came to him and presented him with some information that he petitioned the Department of Health and Human Services for any of the studies that in 1986, Ronald Reagan gave the pharmaceutical companies immunity from getting sued for adverse reactions.
Hmm.
But the requirement was they had to do biannual safety studies. So RFK sent a petition to the Department of Health and Human Services saying, hey, can I see any one of those safety studies since 1986? And they could not produce a single one. So this got him really curious, and he started doing his own research, and a lot of, he realized a lot of things. And so he started speaking out. And so that's another reason why I like him, because he wasn't just closed off and this is what my party thinks and this is what I need to think. And he was open-minded enough to listen to other sides and take in that information and be open-minded enough to explore it. And I have found, just like you were saying, over the past 10 or so years, we've become very divisive, and people stick to their political party like it's a fucking religion.
Right.
Like, my political party thinks this, so I think this, and that is the truth, and that is the way, and anybody else that thinks any differently is wrong. They are just plain wrong. And that just is like, there's so much room to be able to see both sides and agree with things on both sides. Like during the Trump administration, there was so much fighting on my Facebook feed, and I kept seeing people go, oh, I just deleted a whole bunch of people and it feels so good. And from both sides. And I didn't delete anybody. And I have friends on both sides. And one would post something, anti the other side. And I would be like, well, that's actually a good point. And then somebody from the other side would post anti their other side. And I'd be like, well, that's a good point too. And so I'm able to see the pros and cons of both sides. And therefore, I don't consider myself a Republican or a Democrat. If anything, I would vote Green. And I wish Green could be in the primaries, just because if we don't have a healthy earth and a healthy environment, we are not going to be able to be alive on this earth for much longer because of all the toxins. Like right now, you and I both know toxins are a huge contributing factor to fertility challenges. And so I just feel like people aren't seeing the long-term goal. And so that's another reason why I like him, is because he is aware of how the environment is affecting our health and the health of our offspring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, just to give that backstory a little bit more, these women started stalking him at his he would have like town hall meetings in the environmental space, and they just kept showing up and showing up and showing up, and he was like, "No way, that's not my thing. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to touch it." And then someone dropped off like a bunch of research papers, and because he's so scientific, he could read those things, and he was like, yeah, this is fucked up, like I've got to tackle this. And like you say, he is someone who is able to um you know be self-aware. He had and I'm not a mega fan either, but I've seen him speak once, and I listened to the Joe Rogan podcast, and obviously was aware of him before. It's really easy to pick up on his core factors of, you know, obviously being a Kennedy has got to be a weird, fucked up, ancestral
Mm-hmm.
like wish ever, right? Like that family has a lot going for them, and really obviously because they were outliers to the system, right? I'm not saying that they were perfect or they didn't play some games or any of that, but you don't get shot down because you're the good, listener and following all the instructions in politics, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, you obviously the very old people who, Kennedy possibly could have been in office right now, 90-year-olds who can't even like string a sentence together, who's running this country, toted the line. Um, And it's interesting to see another Kennedy go, hey, I'm going to step up and I'm going to put really my life and my family life on the line to right some wrongs that are going on. And like you say, going back to these parties acting like religions, which I do think have very religious ties. I have a really good friend, it was probably like 15 years ago. I said, "Oh, what do you think about this bill in California?" And she's like, "Oh, I don't know. I just vote the way my church tells me to." I was like,
Wow.
"Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
that's pretty fucked up."
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's I think for a lot of people nowadays, it's that radical self-honesty. Are you really looking at what's going on in your life? Do you really believe that it will ever change if we just keep the same two-party system, swip swapping? Because it's the same. I don't think they're different at all,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
I think get in, create these problems for the division, and then obviously people get enough of them after 8 years. I'd be interested to know, is there a party that has had three consecutive presidencies, right? Because you can only have two as
Right.
one, but has the next election been the next candidate who's allowed to come? I kind of want to say not within my lifetime, that's for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. There was something else I was going to say. Let me just recollect my thoughts
Yeah.
here. Um, the whole going with voting how you're kind of told, that also reminded me of people that vote for a particular side based on one singular issue,
Yeah.
like
And
Republicans and abortion. I know,
mhm.
especially here in the with the Amish people, which is crazy because they don't pay taxes but they can still vote, which is bonkers to me. But they all vote Republican, as far as I know, strictly based on the abortion topic. That's it, nothing else.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's really limiting and closed minded as well. And so there's a lot of people that just peg RFK Jr. as an anti vaxxer, conspiracy theorist, and automatically say no when they don't see all of the other things that he is speaking out against that can. Everybody's so pissed off about not being able to afford real estate and about toxins in our environment and about the health of our children and all kinds of other stuff, but yet they're like, nope, he's a conspiracy theorist, he's anti-vax. And so
Mhm.
they just immediately shut off to him when he's got so many more things that benefit most of the average Americans way more than any of the other candidates.
Yeah. And for me, this time around, it's like, do I believe that Kennedy can get to the ultimate finish gun? I personally, like, I know this is conspiracy, but I think that the two-party system will make it where he can't. No matter if he gets the backing, if he gets the money, I mean, he's got the strong numbers in the polls already, especially with our generation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he obviously has enough money. I mean, obviously campaigns need money, but
Mm-hmm.
running that Super Bowl ad, $7 million for 30 seconds, which I think kind of worked because my 8-year-old still sings that song, which I find hilarious. Um, but I think that they'll find a way to make it not happen. But what I'm hopeful for this right now is to show people that there is a way out of this, but they have to be willing to stand up and not just go with the grain, like you say. Like, well, my family will. What will they think of me if I vote that way? It's like, well, what is your grandchildren going to have to live through if you don't take a stand and start shifting a different way, or even just this time around, listen, be more open, and realize that I think it's crazy for me, besides the whole, like, the two-party system potentially just putting a stop to it because they don't want that, if a Kennedy cannot do this, then who can?
Right. Yeah,
right?
it's all set up and rigged it to a certain degree, or maybe way more, to maybe a big degree. But again, I'm not an expert in that, but it really should be easier for there to be multiple parties like there are in other countries.
Hmm.
I remember back in I don't know, it was like 2006 or seven. I was reading, I think it was Michael Moore's book, Stupid White Men, if I remember correctly. And I was in Greece. And so I don't know if this book was published there and if there was any different censorship or whatever, but there was like an additional part to the end of the book, if I remember, so long ago. But he was proposing that the Republican and Democrat parties get together, and from that day forward, it be called the Democratic Republican Party or Republican Democrat Party or something. And that way, it makes way for other parties to take part in actually having a chance. And
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it was tongue in cheek, but I thought it was a pretty good idea because, like you said, they basically are the same thing. It's the corporate media, it's the communications, it's the pharmaceutical industry, it's all of the things that you see commercials for over and over and over again. And that's also why he doesn't really have any major news organizations that are speaking positively about him, because you
Hmm.
don't bite the hand that feeds you. And so
Yeah.
that's why I actually went and followed him, because I wanted to hear what he had to say from his own mouth, not from what my friend heard or from what the headlines show. I can see his body language. I can hear his tone of voice. I can hear what he's saying, and to the depth that he is saying these things based on the amount of research that he's done. So I really like that. First off, he can answer questions coherently, um, which,
But whoa, 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 whoa. Isn't that sad that that's the basic standard of
I know.
like,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah. So again, I just think people need to be truly open-minded, instead of, yeah, I'm open-minded, but this is what my party says, so I'm just going to go with that because they're open-minded and they do the research. I have plenty of friends that is their total mentality. They trust the science, but they're not actually reading the science or the people
Mhm.
that even hearing it straight from the people that. And so, like a lot of people don't realize, and this is the first time I've ever talked about this outside of maybe my clients and my friends, but the placebo for vaccine studies, it's not a true saline placebo. It still has the adjuvants in there. It just doesn't have the germ or the virus in there. And so a lot of what people react to are the adjuvants and additives in those. So it's not a true placebo. And so um, people don't, they're not aware of that. There's so
Mhm.
many things that people aren't aware of. And again, I am not an expert in that either. There's just certain things that I know and certain ways that I feel. And that's part of why I don't talk about these things publicly, because I'm not a good debater and I don't have all the information and I'm not an expert in them. But like I said, I have my thoughts and my feelings, and that's all I really need to go by. I'm not trying to convince anybody else. Everybody is allowed to do whatever they want to do because that is what makes the world go round. But I am free to share my thoughts and feelings and opinions on it, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. Well, so I want to touch on a few things there. Okay. So when we say we're not experts on these, look, I've come to the realization that you don't need to be an expert to have an opinion on multiple factors in this life, right?
Mhm.
And frankly, when you become an expert, or what I see, at least on the mainstream media and influencers and all that, you're just an expert in what you've read.
Mhm.
Right. So when you have these people who are screaming, you're an anti vaxxer, you don't know the material. Well, you've obviously just subscribed to the, pharmaceutical um, reports, and
Mhm.
you're not looking over here and being open enough to say, this is another side, and making a more genuine opinion. And
Mhm.
to be honest, using your intuition, using your gut,
Yep.
using those feelings of like, God, that doesn't feel right, even though those numbers add up over there, which let's just They can skewer the numbers, like you say, even
Mhm,
with the placebo, they can make it look certain ways, and they can do that. I'm not just talking about pharmaceuticals, I'm talking about everything.
mhm.
And
Yep.
so I think that, from my own journey with fertility, I didn't follow my gut, I didn't follow my intuition. I listened to the experts, and the experts weren't right, and
Mhm,
they weren't looking at the right things for me. So until I got over that kind of feeling of like, well, I'm not an expert in this, I can't do it. It's like, well, just try, you know,
well,
just have an opinion. And even if it's wrong, as long as you're consistent and being kind and not trying to force it down people's things, but talk. We all need to talk. And I think that we've really shrunk ourselves down. Like, we're not smart enough, we're not experts, we don't know enough to
mhm.
form educated opinions. I think that's kind of why we are where we are.
And you said it so well that we're experts in what we've read, because a lot of those experts, vaccine experts, right? They're experts on vaccines because they've researched that. And so they're experts on reading the one side. But how many of them actually go and read the other side? There actually was a Harvard immunologist that I used to see a lot in my feed. And she explained a lot of things. And I'm not going to say debunked because, excuse my language, but I fucking hate that word. Anytime something's been debunked, I'm just like, I roll my eyes at it. I just like, that is like my least favorite word. You know how some people, it's moist,
Yeah.
mine is debunked. I just kind of cringe every time I hear it because Snopes, you know, like it's just everything has a bias. And so that's why you need to read both sides and make your own decision about what you think. And maybe it doesn't have to be a yes or no. It could be a whole gray scale of maybes, or if this, then that, or it's possible. We don't have to be definitive in anything. Maybe when it just comes down to that time to vote, but I think we both know what would truly happen if people actually did do their own research and not just take in what they're fed. Then
Mhm.
maybe the way that we vote as Americans would drastically change.
Yeah, exactly. Coming back to like glyphosate and vaccines and toxins in our environment and our foods and all that. There's a really interesting doctor. I'm gonna have to send you his feed if you haven't found him already. He calls himself Dr. H on TikTok. His handle is emergency dopamine.
Hmm.
And his research is super interesting because he's connecting like all these neurodivergencies and autism and all this kind of stuff to the use of all of these products, going back in history and seeing the small changes of like facial features and uh masculine and feminine and all these different things, and how they've slowly, uh, for lack of better words, have dumbed down our genes or
Mm-hmm.
dramatically changed our genes. And that, you can definitely call yourself an expert in genomics, in genes. You blow my mind anytime you talk about it. But I this isn't conspiracy theory, right? This is, you can hard science prove it all the way down for at least 100 years, if not more so, going back to World War One, World War Two, with all these things that they started using in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of factor do you think that plays when you are not firing at all cylinders, right? Let's just say like MTHFR. That one probably a lot of people know about. So the methylation process goes a bit wonky, it's slow, you can't do it right, but that brings you down in a physical way, and then like you're too tired to give a shit about anything. And so
Mm-hmm.
you don't do your own research. How
Mm-hmm.
do you feel like those kind of genetic factors play into even having the energy to care?
Also, as far as MTHFR goes, that is really involved in making our neurotransmitters. And so I think that could also be a reason why we are just so quick to be angry and have this insane amount of use of anti-anxiety medications and antidepressants and all that. And again, it's definitely, the food and the toxins together that are affecting that. So um, that is just one gene, and no gene works in isolation. And so for some people, I think that could be way closer to the mark, and for other people it's way further from the mark. So I can't really say, but I do want to say, to the fact that you called me an expert, thank you, that's very flattering. But the more that I learn about genetics, the more I realize how much I don't know. And I feel that it's almost conceited, because a lot of conceit is rooted in insecurity, calling yourself an expert in something. There are people that I would consider experts in certain things. I guess I'm just too real that with myself, that like, no, there's so much I don't know. And so I can't be an expert in it, because there are so many people that know so many more things than I do.
Jaclyn. That's just a mindset bullshit thing. You are an expert, but you are also aware that you are always going to expand and learn, right? You put yourself in a room with, let's say, the whole population of the United States, you will be in the 1% of people who actually fucking knows what they're talking about when
Oh
it
my
comes to
goodness.
genetics.
Oh my goodness.
It's
Well, thank
true.
you. I don't, well, that's very flattering. Thank you. But I beg to differ. Anyway. Yeah.
But coming back to knowing how genetics are affected, especially before we're even born, when the embryo is created in our mother's womb, as we're growing, knowing that our genetics can be affected. And there is probably, okay, let's just stick to North America, 0 people in North America without a SNP,
Right.
right?
Yep.
There's no one with perfect genetics nowadays. Um, but we know that we can control the way our genetics express with diet, lifestyle, staying away from the toxins and stuff. But, coming back to being able to make those cognitive decisions to even care enough to do your own research, do you think there's just like a large population of people that are just they don't know their genetics, or they don't even know that they need to support themselves in certain ways to function on an 80% level, right? And it goes into this like cycling of like, I can barely, make it through my regular day. I can't deal with the politics stuff.
Mhm.
Where the reality is we are set up to be democratic. But when there's a large part of our population that can't even do that, then they will be affected even more so down the line, because there won't be protections, there won't be that knowledge. It will all of a sudden just become, you know, like I have a lot of clients in Canada, and I think they come to me because they're so regulated with the holistic stuff. It's
Mm.
crazy. You can't even send, like, say if someone needs 3 months support, you can't even send 3 months. You can only send like 60 supplements at a time. So like one bottle at a time, and I see these other countries like New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, who were predominantly more left. And I have to say, I'm kind of happy for all these crazy Republicans, whether they're extreme Republicans or just kind of more of the center Republicans, to keep us in check. To be like, hey, no, we need both. There are, place. We talked about this on you and yours and Joy's episode about cancer, that you use both. You use both the Western and the Eastern holistic medicine. And it was a great combination where if you get so far, which I think is extreme leftism, which is just as scary as extreme rightism, you are only going to get one way and have to live that one way. And even if you kind of wake up and say, okay, this isn't the right way for me, well, you just didn't care enough. You couldn't care enough because you didn't have this awareness about how your genetics were playing into just getting up every day. All right, guys, we are going to pretend like it's 1992 and we are going to pause this episode. It's to be continued. This is called anticipation. If you have not felt this in a really long time, you're welcome. I think it's a feeling that we all need to bring back into our lives. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And thank you once again for tuning in, and looking forward to continuing this conversation on the next episode. Thank you so much again for joining us here on Choices. You can go ahead and leave a 5-star review because we're all friends here. But if you really want to move the conversation forward, please connect with us on our social media accounts, which you can find the links below. Have a beautiful week, and we'll see you next time here on Choices.